The world is witnessing a diplomatic earthquake. In the space of just a few days, three heavyweight Western democracies, the United Kingdom, France and Australia, have officially recognized the state of Palestine. For decades, recognition came mostly from the global South and Arab states. Now, nations traditionally aligned with Israel and the United States are making the move. Why now? And how is Israel reacting to what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has described as a reward for terrorism? The recognition of Palestine by these countries marks one of the most significant shifts in Middle Eastern diplomacy in recent history. It challenges long-standing policies, ignites heated debates, and could reshape how future peace negotiations unfold. In this video, we'll explore the historical background behind Palestine's struggle for recognition, why the UK, France and Australia chose this moment to act, the key political and humanitarian reasons driving the decision, Israel's forceful reaction and fears of diplomatic isolation, developing stories and what could happen next. Palestine's quest for statehood has been at the heart of international diplomacy for over 70 years. After the 1948 creation of Israel and the subsequent Arab-Israeli wars, Palestinians were left with fragmented territories, the West Bank and Gaza, and millions displaced as refugees. Since then, recognition has been a patchwork. Today, over 150 of the United Nations' 193 member states recognize Palestine, mostly from Asia, Africa and Latin America. But the Western powers, like the United States, the United Kingdom, much of the European Union, Canada and Australia, have long held back, arguing that recognition should come only through direct negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. That policy was meant to keep the dream of a negotiated two-state solution alive. But as settlements expanded, Gaza wars intensified and peace talks collapsed, frustration mounted. Critics argued that waiting for Israel and the Palestinians to agree was a recipe for stalemate, and that recognition could be used as leverage. For the UK, the weight of history looms large. Britain administered Palestine under a League of Nations mandate after World War I and played a central role in the events that led to Israel's creation. Successive governments have wrestled with this legacy. France, meanwhile, has long balanced its relationship with Israel with its partnerships across the Arab world. Australia, traditionally a close ally of both the UK and the US, has often followed Washington's lead on Middle East issues. Their joint decision to recognise Palestine is therefore a break from decades of alignment. The latest Gaza war, which began after Hamas's deadly October 7, 2023 attacks, has devastated Palestinian civilians. Israel's military response left tens of thousands dead, entire neighbourhoods destroyed, and humanitarian agencies warning of famine and disease. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese pointed to the killing of an Australian aid worker by Israeli strikes as a turning point. "We cannot look at the destruction in Gaza and stay silent," he said. For the UK and France, images of children buried under rubble and hospitals, overwhelmed by casualties, fueled public outrage and pressure on governments to act. Recognition of Palestine was framed as a gesture of solidarity with civilians trapped in a relentless war. For years, leaders have repeated the mantra, "The only solution is two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace." Yet on the ground, that solution seemed to fade further away with each passing year. Israeli settlement expansion in the West Bank, the lack of serious negotiations and deep divisions among Palestinians, particularly between the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza, all undermined prospects. By recognising Palestine, the UK, France and Australia hope to reverse the narrative, to assert that the dream of two states is still alive. Britain's Foreign Secretary described the move as a necessary step to keep hope alive, to show both sides that the world will not abandon the idea of peace. In each country, recognition was also driven by domestic politics. In Britain, Prime Minister Keir Starmer faced intense pressure from within the Labour Party, which has long supported Palestinian rights. French President Emmanuel Macron has had to respond to street protests and the demands of France's large Muslim population. In Australia, Albanese's government was pushed by civil society groups and backbench MPs who argued that Australia was lagging behind global opinion. Recognition thus became not just foreign policy, but also a political tool to respond to domestic audiences demanding moral clarity. This wave of recognition is not occurring in isolation. Portugal, Canada, Belgium, and other nations have signalled similar steps, creating momentum ahead of the United Nations General Assembly meetings. France hosted a major conference with Saudi Arabia, aiming to revitalise the peace process. Symbolism matters in diplomacy. Recognition is a message to Israel, the Palestinians, and the world that the status quo cannot continue. Israel's response was immediate and furious. Prime Minister Netanyahu accused the UK, France, and Australia of rewarding terrorism, insisting a Palestinian state will never be established west of the Jordan River. Israeli officials argue that recognition undermines security, emboldens Hamas, and rewards violence. With over 48 hostages still held in Gaza, Israeli leaders see recognition as insulting and dangerous. Far-right ministers within Netanyahu's coalition, such as National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, have gone further, calling for outright annexation of large parts of the West Bank. For them, the recognitions are proof that Israel must act unilaterally to secure its future. The Israeli public is divided. Some dismiss the recognitions as symbolic gestures that won't change realities on the ground. Others fear that if more Western countries follow suit, Israel could face increasing diplomatic isolation. The sense of betrayal runs deep in Israeli political circles. For decades, Israel relied on the support of Western allies to shield it from international criticism. Now, even close partners are breaking ranks. Israeli diplomats have warned that these recognitions could trigger a domino effect, with other nations following suit and potentially challenging Israel's position in international forums. Behind closed doors, some Israeli officials acknowledge the symbolic nature of recognition, but fear its long-term consequences. Recognition could strengthen Palestine's case in the International Criminal Court, expand its diplomatic reach, and make it harder for Israel to defend controversial policies such as settlement building. The immediate impact of recognition is limited. Israeli soldiers still patrol the West Bank, Gaza remains under blockade, and Palestinian sovereignty is not established on the ground. But symbolically, recognition changes the diplomatic landscape. It shifts the balance from a purely bilateral dispute to an international consensus demanding statehood. Recognition by Australia came with explicit conditions that the Palestinian Authority hold elections, exclude Hamas, and commit to non-violence. Whether these conditions are realistic remains uncertain, given Palestinian political divisions and the challenges of governance under occupation. The United States remains opposed to unilateral recognition, arguing that it undermines negotiations. But Washington's position is becoming harder to defend as more allies break away. If the recognition wave grows, the US could find itself increasingly isolated, forced to choose between supporting Israel unconditionally or adapting to global pressure. Arab states have welcomed the recognitions, seeing them as long overdue steps. But some warn that without real pressure on Israel, recognition risks becoming symbolic. There are also questions about whether these moves could complicate Israel's normalization efforts with Arab countries under the Abraham Accords. Israel's right-wing ministers are pushing for annexation in response to what they call diplomatic warfare. If Israel moves ahead, tensions could skyrocket, potentially sparking new violence in the West Bank or further destabilizing the region. Critics of recognition argue that it rewards violence, especially after Hamas's October 7th attacks. They say that granting Palestine statehood recognition without addressing security issues undermines Israel's right to defend itself. Others argue that recognition without conditions does little to improve Palestinian governance. The Palestinian Authority is deeply unpopular, accused of corruption and inefficiency. Without reforms, recognition may not translate into real change for Palestinians on the ground. Supporters counter that the status quo is unsustainable and that waiting for perfect conditions simply perpetuates occupation and conflict. For them, recognition is not the end of negotiations, but a necessary step to restart them. The recognitions by the UK, France, and Australia are unlikely to be the last. Other European and Commonwealth nations may soon follow, creating a wave that could reshape the diplomatic map. For Palestine, recognition offers moral victory and greater legitimacy. For Israel, it poses a diplomatic challenge and forces leaders to reconsider their strategies. At the United Nations, recognition could strengthen Palestine's push for full membership. This would require Security Council approval, where the US veto remains a barrier. But growing international support may make that veto harder to sustain politically. The decision by the UK, France and Australia to recognise Palestine is more than a symbolic gesture. It reflects deep frustration with the failure of peace talks, growing outrage over the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, and shifting political dynamics at home and abroad. Israel's furious response highlights the depth of the divide and the risks of further isolation. The road ahead remains uncertain. Recognition alone cannot resolve the conflict, but it may mark the beginning of a new diplomatic chapter. The central question remains, will recognition bring Palestinians and Israelis closer to peace, or will it harden divisions and fuel new rounds of violence?